So what we're going to cover today, I've just really been through, but why fat is so important to human health. Say something about the types of fat, and then I'll pass to Sue and she'll talk about saturated fat and cholesterol and some of the evidence around that. And then healthy fats, unhealthy fats, a little bit about cooking fats, and then storage of fats. So to start with, right, so to start with, can everybody see all right? Can you see these slides all right, everybody? Is that okay? Yeah. So why is fat so important in our diet? It's one of the three macronutrients. So you have protein, fat, and carbohydrate. And both fat and protein have what we call essential fatty acids or essential amino acids for protein. So fat is actually essential. It's essential we eat it, but it's also our bodies do make some, but we have to take fat into our diet as well, because there are some fats that we can't make. So fat is used in the body to do a whole lot of different things. It helps, for example, to maintain the cell membranes of every cell in our body. It's fundamental to our structure and to the human body for every human cell. We also need fat to help us to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. So they are fat-soluble vitamins, and that's why they need to have fat to be able to get your body to absorb them and metabolize them. Fat transports energy, and it also supports CoQ10 in getting into muscle. So last time when we talked about mitochondrial health earlier on, we talked about CoQ10 as being really important to the process of energy production, and fat really is sort of essential to the process of getting that CoQ10 out to all your muscles as well. Fat is fundamental to brain health and to mental health as well, and your brain is composed of a lot of fat as well, so it's really cool. And then fat is also really important for the immune system and for that to function properly. Clearly, energy storage fat is used to store energy for when we need it, when we don't have access to food. And it also helps us to make hormones, so estrogen, and it also makes steroids, and it also supports fertility. So again, really important role there in terms of hormones. It seems that fat is important for the health of the gut barrier, and particularly the short chain fatty acids that you have in some foods or created by the microbiome as well. But those are really important for gut health as well. Helps with cell signaling. There's also a role it plays in converting K1 to K2, which is very important because K1, if it's not converted to K2, may lead to vascularization of the arteries. And then it's also, having fat in your diet is also just really important for your skin and the health of your skin and your hair. So it does a whole lot of things throughout the human body. Just want to say something about the types of fats, and I'll just run through this fairly swiftly. So basically there are two main types of fat: the saturated fats and the unsaturated fats. Saturated fats include animal fats, butter, lard, dairy, that sort of, so mainly animal derived. And then unsaturated fats can be divided into polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. So on the polyunsaturated fats front, you have omega-3s and omega-6 fats. And I'll come on and talk about those in a little bit more detail later on. But the omega-3s are the EPA and DHA that you find in fish, shellfish, and then you also find them in flax and walnuts and some other seeds. Omega-6s mainly come from seeds and found in seed oil. And then on the monounsaturated fats front, you have omega-9 fats, and the particular one that you're probably very aware of is olive oil, but also avocados, peanuts, almonds have omega-9 fats as well. So that's the sort of rundown on the fats we're talking about. And then just, I suppose, although I've mentioned specific foods or oils under each of those headings, it's important to remember that actually many foods and many oils and fats, in fact, have more than one type of those types of fat, if you like. So they're generally a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fat. And so, for example, I mentioned saturated fat being mainly animal, but actually, as you can see here, coconut oil is not an animal, clearly fat, not animal fat, but it is 91% saturated fat. When you're eating coconut oil, it's predominantly saturated fat you're eating. So most things will have a mixture. And for example, olive oil is 73% monounsaturated, but it does contain 16% of saturated fat and 11% polyunsaturated. And if you think about also a meat like pork has a monounsaturated fat called oleic acid, which is the main fat you find in olive oil, in fact. So it's quite a mixed picture, and all of us will be consuming all of these different types of fats really in one way or another. So I'm going to pass over to, I'm going to switch off there, and I'm going to unshare, and Sue is going to share her screen now for a bit. So over to Sue.
I'll just unmute my microphone first. All right, let's. I'm starting.
Right, that's on. Yeah.
All right, just get the slideshow going. Okay, so I'm going to talk about saturated fats, and this particularly looking at this fear we have of eating saturated fats. I want to look at where that fear has come from, because we didn't always have this fear of saturated fat, but it's quite prevalent now. And I want to look at why, and I want to look at some of the current research around saturated fat and health, and try and dispel some of the myths. So we have to go back to this chap here. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a scientist called Ancel Keys. This is back in the 1950s. And he was a very powerful and charismatic character who wasn't actually a nutritional scientist. As you can see, he was an oceanographer and an eel physiologist, but he decided he was going to do some nutritional research. He's very famous for this study called the 7 Countries Study, which started in the 1950s. And it was a massive study across many countries of the world. And basically what he was doing was looking at how much saturated fat the population were eating in a particular country. And then he was correlating that against the incidence of heart disease in that country. And what he concluded was that the intake of saturated fat is proportional to the incidence of heart disease in the 7 countries under study. That's what set it all off, really. That's what got us all thinking that saturated fat was really bad for us. And then we started to get the food industry inventing new types of fat to eat, like margarine and seed oils and things like that. But his research is very controversial, and it remains controversial to this day. And I'm not really going to go into too much in why, but there's a lot of questions over the quality of the research and whether he withheld evidence, and whether the research was just not really done that well. But there are also a lot of counterclaims for criticism. So it remains a controversial study. But the point is, that is where our fear of fat started, was in the 1950s following this study. And we've been stuck with this fear of fat ever since. Well, we can't see the top of the slide now, can we? So saturated fat is associated with the following diseases: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. But is this justified by the evidence? So we're going to have a look at that. All right. Can people see the top of the screen? I can't see it. It's missing a bit, isn't it? Basically, it's saying there is no evidence that saturated fat causes heart disease. Now, this evidence that I'm looking at is called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is the highest level of evidence that you can get. It's when they've looked at all of the evidence they look at all the studies about a particular topic, and they pull all the data from those different studies together and reanalyze it, and that's called a meta-analysis. And it gives you a much higher level of evidence that is more reliable. So this particular meta-analysis was looking at the association of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease. And the conclusion was that there is no significant evidence for concluding that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease. So that study was, I think it's either last year or 2019. It's a very recent study. But also there is no benefit of reducing saturated fat in the diet either. This is another meta-analysis, and this one has concluded that this is a meta-analysis of randomized trials. So randomized trials are also a very high level of evidence because they've used a control group to compare against. And this is a meta-analysis of randomized trials, so that makes it even better. And they found there was no beneficial effects of reducing saturated fat intake on cardiovascular disease and total mortality, and actually found that there are protective effects against stroke. So not only is there no benefit from reducing saturated fats in your diet does not reduce your incidence of cardiac disease, but it can increase the incidence of stroke. So we don't want to reduce saturated fat. This one is another meta-analysis. This is the effect of replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fats, ones that contain N6 means omega-6. So if you replace saturated fat with omega-6 fats, then what we find is replacing saturated fat with mostly N6 puffers. Puffer is polyunsaturated fatty acids, is unlikely to reduce coronary heart disease events or coronary heart disease mortality or even total mortality. Okay, so just switching saturated fats for the N6 unsaturated fats, which are the seed oils, basically, the vegetable oils that Isabel was talking about, that does not reduce the incidence of heart disease, in fact, or even deaths from any cause. And there we go. That's what N6 fats are, that little picture at the bottom. Okay, then we had the question of, is saturated fats associated with type 2 diabetes? And again, we've got a pooled analysis here. That's another way of saying meta-analysis. So another high level of research here. What's interesting about this one is they've used what they call fatty acid biomarkers of dairy fat. So where most studies will actually ask people how much dairy fats they're eating, you know, they'll do a food recall or a food diary, which we know are very unreliable. This one has actually taken blood samples from all the people in the study and actually measured the amount of dairy fats that are actually in their blood as an indicator of how much dairy they're actually eating. So that's eliminated sort of any error there. What they found is in this large meta-analysis, this looks at 16 studies, that people who had higher levels of these dairy fats, and they've given them numbers there, but they're all dairy fats, that was associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. So eating more dairy fats was associated with a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. The little study at the bottom here was actually looking specifically at what type of dairy fats people were eating, and they came to a conclusion that cheese-derived saturated fats were significantly related to lower type 2 diabetes risks. So cheese in particular seems to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. In this one, it's looking at the health effects of saturated fats. This was a narrative review. So in this paper, and this only came out last year, they were looking at all of the evidence for saturated fat and different health concerns, and it was sort of looking at a whole range of things. So I've picked out a few things about this, particularly to do with cholesterol. So what this paper is saying, that whilst saturated fat does actually increase LDL cholesterol, and I don't know what you understand about cholesterol, but we tend to have this idea of having healthy cholesterol and unhealthy cholesterol, and the LDL is considered to be the unhealthy cholesterol, which is not actually true. You can have healthy LDL and you can have unhealthy LDL, but the LDL in itself is not a bad thing to have. It's actually a very essential thing to have, because it does a lot of different things in the body. But what this paper has found is that the increase in the LDL seems to be the non-atherogenic type. So the large fluffy LDL particles, which are the healthy ones, actually are increased by eating saturated fats, as are the high density, the HDL cholesterol, that is increased by eating saturated fats. But saturated fats are associated with a decrease in the unhealthy particles. These lipoprotein A particles are the unhealthy component of cholesterol. And if you eat saturated fat, then you actually decrease the levels of the unhealthy one. And there was even one study that showed that saturated fat consumption may actually slow the progression of atherosclerosis or heart disease. So although saturated fat does increase the total amount of LDL, it actually increases the healthy component of it, and decreases the unhealthy component of it. And this is also from this paper, which was reviewing another study called the Sydney Heart Study, and that showed whilst a diet low in saturated fat and high in polyunsaturated fats actually lowers serum cholesterol, it actually increases mortality and coronary heart disease. So it actually does the opposite of what you would expect. So despite lowering your LDL, it still increases heart disease and total mortality. There's quite a lot in this paper, so this is the same paper again. I just have one more conclusion from it I wanted to share, and this is about whether saturated fat causes cancer, which was the third health risk that we mentioned earlier. So among cancers, milk and dairy intake was inversely associated with colorectal cancer, bladder cancer, gastric cancer, and breast cancer. So the more dairy you ate, the less risk you had of those cancers. It didn't have any association with pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, or lung cancer. And the evidence for prostate cancer was not consistent, so we can't draw a conclusion on that. So dairy products in particular are not associated with cancer, or they actually reduce the risk. Now, back to Isabel now. So I'm going to stop sharing, somehow stop share, there we go.
So now we're going to move on to talk about what fats we should eat and what fats we shouldn't, or we should avoid. So before we go into the specifics, I just want to talk a little bit about polyunsaturated fatty acids again. So Sue mentioned those on a few occasions in some of those studies. And really what we're talking about here are the omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And these are what we call essential fatty acids, in that you can't make them in your body, or not, most of them you can't make in your body, so you have to get them from your diet. And they're really important for your cell membranes in particular, and for gene expression, so really key for the human health. So the main type of omega-6 is linoleic acid, and that's most common and the one that we talk about the most, found in fruit and vegetables, grains, meats, and then also found a lot and predominantly in the industrially produced and refined oils that we see on the supermarket shelves, like soy oil, sunflower, safflower, and corn oil. There's also another omega-6 I won't talk about really, because we can make this, so it's not so essential, the arachidonic acid. The Omega-3s are, first of all, alpha-linoleic acid, which is found in seeds like flax, chia, and walnut, or important healthy foods. And then the EPA and DHA that you find predominantly in fatty fish, which is why everybody's always saying, eat more fish. So there's a problem with polyunsaturated fatty acids, and there are 4 different issues that we have with them. So the first one is the ratio of omega-6 to 3. So in the past, we would have traditionally had a ratio of roughly 1 to 1, or fairly equal quantities of omega-6 and omega-3 in our diets. In fact, probably a little bit more 3 than 6, but predominantly it was around about the same level of both oils in our normal diet traditionally. We would have had overall a lot more omega-3 generally in our diet than we have now, and we've moved away from what was a 1-to-1 type ratio to something in the Western world that looks more like 15 to 1 omega-6 to 3, or even as much as 20 to 1 in some of the studies in American population food intake would take it above 20 in some cases. But either way, in most cases, our omega-3, 6 to 3 is not where it should be, and we need to reduce that ratio down to more like 2 to 1 in terms of 6 and 3, more equal level, with probably a little bit more 6 than 3. But that's a big issue for us in terms of what's changed over recent years. And the excess of omega-6 and the insufficiency of omega-3 is linked to inflammation, gut dysbiosis. It depletes vitamin E, and it's also associated with weight gain. So those 2 are the sort of, I suppose, one set of issues that we've got. Then we've also got the way in which most of the oils that are omega-6 oils, those seed oils, the way that those oils are produced and refined. And then we've got the process of oxidation, which occurs because these particular fats are very easy to they oxidize very easily. So I'll come on and talk about that in a little bit more detail. So just a little bit about the production of vegetable oils. So these are seed oils, they're not vegetable oils really, they're the seeds that are used. And they are produced in very large industrial plants, and the vegetable oil or seed oil goes through a whole process of refining and bleaching and hydrogenation and post-bleaching and emulsifying, and a whole lot of different things go on. And really, the oils do not resemble the seeds that they come from when they've been through a process like this. It's very high heat quite often, and it's just generally it changes the nature of what we've got in the first place substantially through going through this process. So you can imagine, and that's what produces our margarines, and then the oils that we get, the bulk seed oils that we see on the shelves of supermarkets. And just moving on then to talk about the stability of fats and this whole process of oxidation, which is actually so harmful, and it's very bad for your health when oils and fats are oxidized. So if you look at the saturated fats that Sue was talking about, they're actually very stable fats in that they are a chain of carbon atoms which are then saturated with hydrogen. So every last point is saturated. So it's a long, solid, stable structure, and that's why they're hard fats. If you come on to monounsaturated fats, these are the olive oil and the avocado oil. Then basically they have one double bond, which makes them less stable than the saturated fats, and they are liquid at room temperature, but they're more able to be damaged because of that double bond. And then when you come to the polyunsaturated fats, they have multiple double bonds. So as you can see, they can be damaged much more easily, because that's where you have the weakness, if you like, in terms of the structure of those fats. And then we have trans fats, which are completely made from nothing, in that they are a totally unnatural fat. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment, but they're a completely different chemical structure altogether from anything that we'd have seen naturally. So the oxidation of fats. So if you have a fat that is unstable, and then it's affected by heat or light or oxygen, and I'm sure there are other things that can affect it as well, then it produces free radicals. And that damage to the molecules will produce free radicals. And the free radicals are really bad for you. It's the oxidation process that you have. So that's why we all need antioxidants to deal with the oxidation products. So we don't want to have extra free radicals in our bodies produced by oxidated fat. But it's quite interesting, because people know that oxidized fats are bad for you. But this is just a quote I wanted to show you from a piece of research that came out recently and was published in the Journal of Food Science and Nutrition Research. So this says, the intermediates of lipid oxidation has adverse effect on shelf life and characteristics, deterioration, some physical properties such as taste, colour and odour of lipid-containing food products. And then, almost as an afterthought, they say, formation of these hazardous intermediate products in the concerning food is also inconvenient for the health of consumers. And I think that's a rather interesting quote, but yes, it's a bit shocking, really. So want to talk a little bit more about those trans fats that I mentioned earlier, and then also those industrially produced vegetable oils, the safflower, the sunflower, and so on. So first of all, trans fats, we should not eat these. We shouldn't go anywhere near them. They have been found, and the governments say they are dangerous to human health, and they increase the risk of cancer, heart disease, and inflammation, amongst other things. And the government has set limits for us all to have below 2% level of trans fats in our diet. So they really are, well recognized internationally as being very, very harmful. Over the recent years, the food industry has taken a lot of those products out of the food that we eat, but they still remain. So you do need to look out for them. And then secondly, the industrially produced seed oils and vegetable oils. So these are the omega-6 oils, which are produced through that factory production means. They add all kinds of harmful additives, and then they're often heated, and then they're made more toxic as we use them in our cooking processes as well. So you want to avoid these as well. So just going on to the detail about where you find these products. So the trans fats are normally labeled hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, mono and diglyceride of fatty acids. So those are the labels you're looking out for. And they're still found in some processed foods as listed there. So you need to read the labels to look out for them. But this, for example, Stork for fluffy cakes does contain these mono and diglycerides. Although they are probably less bad than some of the other hydrogenated products, they are still harmful, and you do need to avoid them. And then the industrially produced seed oils. So really, you're talking about these sort of bottles of oil that you find that are cheap and readily available in the supermarket, and they basically contain sunflower oil, safflower, canola, corn, and also tubs of margarine. If you look at the margarines that you see on the shelves as well, again, they are produced in a similar fashion, so they really are not something that I would recommend at all. And then don't forget, these oils are then also used in processed foods that you can buy in the supermarket. All these pastries and salad cream, sauces, ready meals, they will use these oils normally, and not olive oil, not coconut oil. And then if you go to restaurants and you have a lot of fried food in a restaurant, then again, they're going to be cooking in these industrialized oils because they are the cheapest. So in terms of what fats we recommend then, so we're talking about less refined fats. We're talking about the natural fats, the traditional fats, and not the industrially produced fats. So anything that would come normally naturally from plants and animals, we would recommend, especially that they've not been tampered with too much, is the main thing. So we would say really olive oil is great, avocado, coconut oil, but choose the unrefined coconut oil rather than the one that's had the if you take some of them say that they take the taste of the coconut out, but whilst they're doing that, they're refining the product, and therefore it gets some of the disbenefits I mentioned in terms of the industrialized oils. Macadamia nut, butter, ghee, Daria mentioned ghee last week, and definitely we'd include that on the list. Animal fats, lard, drippings, that sort of thing, almond oil, and fish clearly. But these, the list on the right-hand side, walnut, flax, sesame, walnuts, seeds, and fatty fish, definitely include all of these things in your diet. But what we would say for these is just be careful not to heat too hot. So when you're cooking with them, just only cook with them if you're cooking at a gentle heat. Don't fry fast, because that will damage the oil and lead to oxidation. So just be careful do use these, and obviously eat fatty fish and seeds and walnuts and so on, but just be careful not to overheat them so that they might oxidize. Then when it comes to storing fats, just be careful not to keep oils in the back of the cupboard for too long. I think we can all be guilty of that sometimes, but really you need to store them in a cool or cold place and dark conditions, and you can keep them in the fridge, for example, especially those oils like flaxseed oil and ones on that list which were more vulnerable, I suppose, to oxidation. Temperature impacts on the storage life, so if you're not able to keep them in a cool place, then you don't need to be keeping them so long. You need to throw them out more quickly. Unrefined oils will keep for 3 to 6 months in cool conditions, and then polyunsaturated oils will go rancid more quickly than other fats. So just to bear in mind, and keep a watch on the date. Remember when you opened the oil, if possible, just write on the side of the bottle when you opened it, and then you'll know to be careful not to keep it for too long if you haven't eaten it. So I think that's about it. We can come on to questions and comments in just a moment. Just giving you our details again there for Sue and myself, but I've also just given you the detail, the link for our Facebook page, because Sue and I work together, and we've recently set up a Facebook page called Cinnamon Days. And if you wanted to have a look at that, then it will give you we're basically posting, I suppose, health hints and advice around metabolic health, and generally, foods that are good, and general advice about nutrition. That's just for your information if you wanted to have a look at it. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we can move on and have any discussion or questions. So stop there. There we are. So, right. So I'm going to have a look at. Sue, do you want to undo your mic as well? So perhaps you and I can both sort of pick up different questions as we go on. So if we start with a couple of the questions in the chat. Let me see. Oh, there's a question there about obesity. Now, I'm not quite sure what, are you talking about are you talking about all the oils and fats in that respect? The question there, do they cause obesity? Sue, do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yes, well, I'm assuming the question is, does eating fat cause obesity? Well, if you eat too much, then yes, because fat is quite calorie dense. It has 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories a gram for carbohydrates and protein. So yes, if you consume too much fat, it will be stored on your body as fat. but it's not the only driver of obesity. Obviously, eating too much sugar will also cause obesity, because if you eat too much sugar in your diet or refined carbohydrates, then that too can be converted to fat and stored on your body. So yeah, I mean, everybody, although we're saying eating certain fats is healthy, it's, you know, it's in the context of not eating too many calories overall. So we all have a tendency to put on weight if we eat far too many calories, but it's getting the balance of the macronutrients really between your carbohydrates, your fats and your proteins within your calorie allowance. So what we're saying is you don't have to restrict yourself too much on fats, particularly saturated fats, which is the one that we've always come to fear, because, you know, I've presented the evidence to show you that saturated fats are not bad for health in the way that the media often portrays it. But yeah, of course, if we all consume too many fats overall, whether they're saturated or unsaturated, then, you know, they will be stored as fat. So we have to be careful.
Great. Okay, thanks for that, Sue. The next question is around rapeseed oil, and the question is whether it's healthier than sunflower oil and how much better, and should it be removed from the diet? Well, it just depends really on how it's made. I think I wouldn't recommend buying rapeseed oil from the kind of mass-produced rapeseed oil in the supermarket. So that's going to be one of those factory industrially produced oils. If it's in the normal, you find it in the supermarket. You can buy rapeseed oil, which is refined and is more produced in a different way, more like you can have virgin olive oil. You can get rapeseed oil which is being produced in a more in a more normal, natural way, and not mass produced. I'd have to just check what the proportion. I think it is omega-6 predominantly, but I'd have to just check that. Yes, it's the more cold pressed, I think would be a much better option if you've got that kind, and I would avoid the kind you get in the supermarket.
Can I just add something?
Please.
In case people don't know, that canola oil and rapeseed oil are the same thing. Canola oil stands for Canada oil because rapeseed oil was first produced in Canada. But just an interesting fact about it is it was actually produced as an engine lubricant. It was never initially produced as a food, but then some wise person decided it wouldn't actually kill you to eat it, and it was cheap to produce, and so it did come into the food chain as an oil that we can cook with, but it was actually designed to be an engine oil, really. So if you still want to eat it.
Yeah, I think if you can think of something, if you can choose a different one, that would be better. It wouldn't be the first choice, even if it was a good, well-produced version. I think you're better off with coconut. You're better off with if you're trying to eat plant-based foods, then I think coconut is probably a better choice for cooking with. And then some of those seed oils that we mentioned, like flaxseed, and some of the nut oils, perhaps for for salads and that sort of thing, and olive oil, of course. So I would, yeah. And the suggestion here that supermarket olive oil is mass produced, yes, it can be, and I think that's why you should try and look for the extra virgin olive oil as being the first choice, and you generally pay a bit more for it, but it's what you should go for. It's not been tampered with as much as the one that doesn't say extra virgin olive oil. So that's what I would do. So the point here about obesity, leading cause of COVID death toll. Should the government take a new approach to encouraging healthy eating? I would absolutely agree with that. I think metabolic health in particular is completely fundamental in terms of how bad COVID infections are. So I've certainly seen quite research just in the last few days, which is showing that the people who get COVID worst, who go into hospital and who get seriously ill, about 65% of those people have metabolic health problems. So dealing with health and dealing with metabolic health in particular is absolutely key. And I completely think that the government should have been focused on that over the last year, and at least advising people what they can do to help become more healthy in order to ward off the risk of a more dangerous infection occurring. So I definitely totally agree with that. Does anyone have a theory as to what is causing the conditions mentioned if we are no longer blaming saturated fats? Well, my view, and I suspect that Sue would say the same, is that it's the sugar and it's the refined carbohydrates that are causing us the problem. That's what's causing metabolic disease in particular. So we've changed our diet substantially over the last few decades, and all of us have consumed these more processed foods, the foods with more sugar, more refined carbohydrates, and that affects our metabolic health, so that we end up putting on weight, we end up getting pre-diabetic and then diabetic, or getting a whole range of other diseases, and our immune health is also suffering as a consequence.
I think the other thing is processed foods. Processed foods are, scientifically produced basically by scientists to hit our bliss point in our brain. So they have combinations of fat and sugar that affect our appetite center in the brain, causing us to overeat. So they're actually a big cause of obesity. But processed foods contain a lot of additives, which we know are cause a lot of problems, particularly in the gut. They directly attack the gut lining and cause all sorts of problems, and cause this problem called leaky gut, where we can start to absorb things through the gut that we're not really supposed to, and that affects our immune systems. And so that so processed foods are just really bad for lots of reasons. It's not just the fat and sugar content, and they contain more likely to contain trans fats and the polyunsaturated fats with the omega-6s that we've been saying are not healthy to eat. So they're possibly reasons why we're getting a lot of these illnesses now, along with the lifestyle things like people not exercising enough, being stressed, not getting enough sleep. This all has effects on health as well. So it's it's a much bigger picture. It's not just food that we eat, it's whole lifestyle stuff. Smoking, alcohol, all these things contribute as well. We'll fight over this one. Yes, certainly you can use olive oil in salad dressings and things using it cold. You can heat it, but we generally recommend that you do gentle sauteing with it, so you don't heat it too hot, because it has quite a low smoke point. Yeah. If you're just sauteing at a lower temperature and you're not allowing it to smoke, then it's perfectly all right to cook with. And I cook with it all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good, and I think the trouble is in quite a lot of countries they move away from their traditional oils like ghee, and they adopt the Western oils, the vegetable oils or the seed oils, and that's much. I mean, I think that's a really worrying trend, that so many countries have moved away from what they have used traditionally, and it's having a consequence on their health as well. So I certainly know that in some African countries people have just use these big vats of vegetable oil, and it's really going to be very damaging for them over time as well.
The same's true in Polynesian countries, where they used to use coconut oil as their natural oil, and they've moved to seed oils, and they've got the highest incidence of obesity in the world now as a result of doing that.
Yeah. Just one thing, just going back to the weight issue again, because the question or comment here about low fat and fat free and all of that, and over many decades we have seen so many foods on the shelf saying low fat, low fat, low fat, and what they have been is quite often these foods which are produced industrialized and in terms of the production, and as Sue said, they're processed foods, quite often very poor foods, very limited nutrient value as well. And so I think we need to lose that whole low fat thing. I think that's just really bad for you. I think, you know, using fat in your diet, you need fat in your diet to stay healthy anyway. Choosing the right fats for your health, and then, you know, just using them as part of a meal of your normal diet. But as long as your normal diet is filled with natural foods, you know, and low in sugar and refined carbohydrates, and just generally speaking, I think that's a much better approach than saying I'm looking for low fat things. I think that just hasn't helped anybody. Over decades, people have just put more and more weight on by doing just that. They've taken advice, they've gone down the low fat route, and it's got them nowhere. So although, you know, clearly you have to limit the total amount of food you're eating, you do need fats as a part of your diet. So just choose the good fats and don't worry about it.
A lot of the low fat foods, like low fat yogurts and things like that, they replace the fat with sugar is the problem. So they become quite sugary foods, and as we know, eating a lot of sugar can lead to obesity, because it gets turned into fat in the body. So eating low fat foods to lose weight doesn't make any sense if you're eating more sugar. So it's best to avoid them and just eat the full fat versions. Just don't overeat them. That's all.
Yeah, the other thing about fat in your diet is that if you've had a meal with fat in it and protein, then actually it keeps you fuller for longer. It keeps you satisfied longer, and then you're less likely to want a snack before your next meal. So fat is very satiating. It does make you feel more comfortable if you've had a meal with fat in it. So that's another recommendation. Carbs and sugars are definitely stored as fat. Yes. So a point here: never fry with olive oil. After reading how nasty it gets when overheated, I moved to coconut oil mostly. I think coconut oil is a really good bet. I definitely go with it. I use quite a lot of coconut oil as well, and I use butter, and I use olive oil, and then I use lard as well, depending on what I'm cooking and how hot it is. So coconut oil, somebody doesn't like coconut oil. Coconut oil does have a flavour. You can get it, as I say, you can get a refined version which doesn't have the taste of the coconut. I think the taste of the coconut just really mixes in with your food when you're cooking a stir fry or something. You don't really notice the coconut; it's just part of the overall flavour. But as I say, you can get them where the coconut oil has been refined a bit, but then it's less good for you, if you like. It's not quite as good a product for your health as a whole. But you can still choose that option. That's fine. And again, with it being a saturated fat, it has a high smoking point as well. So it's, again, you're going to get into too much trouble with that in terms of the oxidation and the damage to the oil. So I think that's good bet. Dr. Mile has a document which gives information on omega-6 and 3s and ratios, etc., in terms of good fats. That's really useful, and it is really good to have that information. She's got it documented on the site. That's great, because it's quite complicated, because all these seeds and nuts and so on, they have a varying amount of different fats. So they have a varying amount of saturated fat, monosaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. And then in terms of the proportion which is polyunsaturated, they then have a different ratio of 6:3. So trying to pick the right ones so that you've got the right amount, the right ratio of 6:3, if you're trying to get that right and trying to reduce your omega-6s and increase your omega-3s, then it's good to have that kind of information. And certainly, things like flaxseed and chia seed, for example, both have more omega-3 than 6. So you just know automatically that those are going to be giving you more omega-3. So that's great. They're both of them more 3 than 6. Walnuts are really good as well, but they have more omega-6 than 3. So it's about 4:2 ratio, or 4.2, sorry, around 4:1 ratio. But that's still a whole lot better than quite a lot of other nuts and other foods as well. So it's really good to have a look at them, because some of them have very high amounts of omega-6s in, and some of them have low. And trying to pick the right one is worth doing. And thank you very much for that that link to Dr. Myhill's site. I haven't specifically looked at that detail on her site, but I've got it elsewhere. But that's useful for people to have a look at if they're trying to up their omega-3s. How do omega-3, 6, 9s help with metabolism and brain health? Well, there's quite a lot of evidence around omega-3s and brain health. Fish oil is generally meant to be brain and heart healthy. Specifically 9s, I'm not quite so sure. Sue, do you have any detail about omega-9s?
No, I don't, because omega-9's not essential, is it? It's we can actually make omega-9, so we tend to focus on the ones that are essential, which means you have to eat them in your diet because your body can't make them, and that's the 3s and the 6s. So we tend to focus on those more.
Omega-3, but omega-3s are good for your brain, aren't they?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence of that, and you know, reducing dementia risk. But omega-3s are also good for the gut microbiome as well. It can help to improve the diversity of the gut microbiome. So if you can't eat a lot of fiber because it gives you gut symptoms, because we eat fiber to feed the microbiome, but if that's a bit difficult for you, if you've got IBS, for example, then up your omega-3s, because that also feeds the microbiome, so and improves diversity.
That's good. Great. So the question here about lard and what kind of temperatures can you use lard for? You can use lard for hot cooking. So lard is very stable. You can use it. So if I'm frying an egg, I might get the lard out because I know that it needs to be quite hot for an egg, for a fried egg, and lard can cope with that, and it's not a problem. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that with lard. How does the amount of fat eaten impact on cholesterol levels? Sue, would you like to take that one?
Yeah. Well, certainly eating saturated fat will increase your cholesterol. That's without a doubt. But as I talked about in one of those studies, it actually increases healthy cholesterol. It increases the HDL, which is healthy cholesterol, but it also increases the healthy type of LDL. It raises LDL, but we have to stop thinking of LDL as being bad cholesterol. It's only damaged LDL that is bad cholesterol. Healthy LDL is not cause heart disease. That's the message to get over there. The same situation as you. I have high cholesterol as well, okay? But what's important is it's not so much the quantity of cholesterol, it's the quality of it that's really important. And if we consume seed oils and we consume a lot of refined carbohydrates and sugar, that can actually cause damage to the proteins that carry cholesterol around the body. And those proteins are the LDL and the HDL, okay? If we cause oxidation of those proteins, and what the sugar does, if you have too much sugar in your blood, because you just eat a lot of sugar in your diet, those sugar molecules stick to the outside of the lipoproteins and damage them. And then they can't get pulled back into the liver, which is what the normal thing is. The liver produces LDL. It circulates around your blood, dropping off cholesterol and fatty acids to the cells that need it, the work they need to do. And then as it comes back through the liver, it gets pulled back in, okay? If it's damaged, it can't get pulled back in by the liver, so it hangs around in the blood, and it attracts the attention of the immune system. It's almost like it puts out a signal saying, help, I'm damaged, come and help me. And the big macrophages, big immune cells come over to try and gobble it up, but it sets off a cascade of inflammation, basically. So if you cook with seed oils and you have a lot of sugar in your diet, you might produce more unhealthy LDL that causes inflammation in the body, and that can be a cause of heart disease if it's unhealthy LDL. If you refrain from sugar and you don't use the seed oils, it's most likely that even if your LDL has gone up, it's healthy LDL and it's not going to cause any problems. The problem with the tests that the doctors do is it just looks at quantity. That's all. It'll look at HDL and LDL, but it's just quantity. It's not looking at the quality. and there aren't any clinical tests, not even privately, that look at the quality. The sort of tests that look at quality of LDL are only done in research situations, which is how we know about the existence of all these different particles and things, but they're not used clinically at the moment. So best thing you can do for yourself is to make sure you're not consuming the sugar and you're not consuming the nasty seed oils and unhealthy fats, because they might cause your LDL to oxidize and become inflammatory. So I'm in the same situation as you. The only test you could have done, which you'd have to have done privately to see if your cholesterol is actually causing any heart disease, is what's called a calcium artery score. It's like a scan. You can have it done at the Nuffield Hospital in Derby, but you might need a GP referral to go. I'm looking at it for myself actually as well. And they do this special scan, and they can tell whether there's any calcification in the arteries, which will tell you if there's heart disease. If you haven't got any, if your calcium score comes back at 0 or very low, then I won't worry about what your cholesterol is, because you've obviously got healthy cholesterol.
We need to be wrapping up shortly, but there's just a couple more questions to pick up here about baking, and somebody asking what can be used for baking, and somebody suggesting baking with coconut oil. You can also bake with olive oil. There are some nice recipes you can find made of olive oil, which works fine as long as you've got the right proportions of other ingredients in the cooking. But you can look those up. I think there's a nice one with olive oil and rosemary that I've seen before now. A nice cake of some sort. But if you're looking for, because I think you're looking for something which has not got, let me see, it's a non-dairy option. I think that was about, wasn't it? Because dairy-free and soy-free. So presumably butter may not suit for that. I mean, I would normally go to butter, but if you're not eating butter, then I think coconut and then the oils like olive oil would probably be the best options. Fish. So getting fish, not wanting to eat fish, can't get enough omega-3 in the diet. Algal oil as a supplement. I've not heard of that. That's interesting. Do you know algal oil? Can you make any comment on that? Or
yeah, I mean, I have seen actually that because normally the criticism of using plant-based omega-3s, it's not quite in the right format for humans. We have to convert it into a more active form. But I have seen on a supplement company that they have made some that actually makes the EPA and AHA, which is the same as the animal version. So allegedly you can get it, and it's I think it was said to be better than cod liver oil, because we all think cod liver oil is really high in omega-3s, but it's not that high really, not compared to taking an omega-3 capsule anyway. So so yeah, I think you could try the algal oil as a source of omega-3 if you don't want to take fish oil capsules. Fish will take the fish oil capsules, so I don't know if you will or not.
Some fish oil capsules are better than others at stopping that, that fishiness repeating. Yeah. But some of them are pretty good, and you just don't get it at all. But I'd have to just check the names of those. If anybody's interested, I can do that. Suggestion about non-stick pans not needing oil. Well, I think that's some of those non-stick pans, the Tefal ones, for example, are actually not good for health in themselves. So they let off chemicals when they're cooking, which aren't good for you. So you have to be a bit careful of the non-stick pans anyway. And I think it'd be much better to use, the right kind of oil and just to cook normally in oil. Can you take too much fish oil, krill oil? Taking 2 krill oils capsules at the moment. Don't feel you're taking enough. I don't know. It depends on the dose on the packet. I don't know whether there are any maximum limits. I think it would have to be quite a lot more than 2 capsules you'd be taking to be getting too much. I don't think I wouldn't worry about that. I don't know, Sue, have you got any thoughts on fish oil and whether you can overdo it on the fish oil?
it's a difficult one because I think it's probably going to vary a bit from individual to individual and how much is in each capsule, because that will vary depending where you've got it from. But I think you can take too much omega-3, yeah, if you really, I don't know how much is too much is the problem, but I know that what can happen is you incorporate omega-3 into your cell membranes and the omega-6, and that's a normal part of the cell structure. And like we said, it should be in a sort of 1-to-1 ratio in the cell membrane. And for many of us, we'd have too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. But if you take a lot of omega-3 supplements, you can shift the balance the other way and have too much omega-3 and not enough omega-6. So, you know, you can shift the problem the other way, and that's not great either. So, yeah, I would stay within the recommended dose of what it is. And if you're using the supplement instead of eating fish, then you might be all right. But if you're eating lots of fish as well, then, you know, there is the potential to overdo it a bit. So, yeah, I think you have to be a bit careful. I wouldn't exceed any recommended doses.
Okay, thank you. And just the final question I think we'd better take now, because I think people need to get away. A private doctor advised that it is the ratio between HDL and LDL which matters the most. Any comments on this? Sue, do you have a comment on that ratio?
Yeah, I mean, the higher your HDL, the better, yeah. But there are sort of set limits, the sort of parameters in which you should try and aim for. I think the HDL should be above 1.2 millimoles per litre, and the LDL should be below 4.2, something like that. And that should give you a good ratio. Some people have high LDL but very low HDL. But the other component that's important, probably more important, is the triglyceride levels. And they do measure that now and give you a figure for your serum triglyceride levels, which should be really low, should be below 1.2, preferably the lower the better, because that is implicated in heart disease. And you'll tend to have high triglyceride levels if you eat a lot of carbohydrates. Not from eating fats, it's from eating carbohydrates. So you want a really low triglyceride level and a high HDL level. Those two things are more important than the HDL to LDL ratio, I think. That's not
so triglycerides are really key. So they do that as normal, do they, Sue? Yeah, is that part of the fat score, the lipid measures?
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. So last question, do raw unprocessed nuts provide the oils and fats? Yes, they do. That's fine. You'll definitely get oils when you're eating the nuts, or the seeds as well. You'll get those particular oils through that route as well. You don't, so that's fine. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and thank you very much, Sue, for coming along today as well.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll see you again next week. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.